Chapter 13. It was decided that we were to leave that night in just a few hours. There was no time to waste. With every hour that passed, Call only got stronger, and our chances of surviving the attack he was surely preparing slimmed. Miss Cuckoo, Miss Wren, and Miss Peregrine accompanied us out of the council chamber and downstairs to the costuming department. From a vast room filled with hanging racks, Gaston, the costuming department director, chose period-appropriate outfits for each of us, all shades of brown and green that would blend into the turned earth of a battlefield and hopefully attract minimal attention from either the British and French soldiers near Miss Hawksbill's loop or the Germans after we crossed the front lines. While we tried on clothes, we gathered in a cluster around the dressing room, and the Embrons talked to us about what would happen when we crossed over. They tried to hide their nervousness, but it showed in the way Miss Peregrine kept fiddling with the pins in her upswept hair, in Miss Cuckoo's tapping foot, and in Miss Wren's uncharacteristic quiet. The fact was, there wasn't a lot they could tell us. They didn't know Miss Hawksbill well, but Miss Cuckoo repeated several times that under no circumstances should we attempt to cross the front lines to find the entrance to Miss Turn's loop without her help.
"She will surely know a safe passage," Miss Peregrine said, "having maintained a loop there for the better part of a century."
But she sounded more hopeful than certain. And the fact that I'd never heard of Miss Hawksbill before a few minutes ago made me think she might be an odd duck and not very helpful at all.
"All wrong, Gaston, all wrong," Miss Cuckoo said impatiently, wrinkling her nose at my outfit. "The jacket makes him look too much like a soldier."
I shrugged out of the jacket and Gaston disappeared into the racks again.
"I wish I could go with you," Miss Cuckoo said. "I'm from the north of France, and I know the area where you're heading fairly well, not in wartime, but still. I would give both my wings to accompany you," Miss Peregrine said heavily. "But all 12 Embrons must stay here in the acre, or the quilt and its protections will falter." "Don't worry about us, miss. We'll be back before you know it,"
Bronwyn said, and smiled. Miss Peregrine forced a smile in return. We returned to Ditch House without the Embrons to pack and rest a little before the journey, and leaving the Ministry's building, we were forced to pass through the restless crowd outside its doors. Behind us, Francesca made an announcement through a bullhorn that the Embrons would address them soon. In a few minutes, this tempest in a tea kettle would fade away, but so too would the reinforcements and extra muscle that the Americans had provided, who, I assumed, would be leaving along with their leaders. All the more reason we had to stop Call before he found a way to break through the Embron shield. Back at the house, Claire started to cry when we told her about our new mission. Fiona and Hugh solemnly wished us luck. "I knew they wouldn't let you go without taking some of us along," Hugh said, translating for Fiona. She felt her place was here, standing with the Embrons in defense of the acre, and naturally, Hugh wasn't about to leave her side. I was sure he would have tried to stop her even if she wanted to go with us, having already lost and regained the love of his life once this year. After all that, the idea of Fiona risking her safety in the trenches of one of the century's deadliest wars would have been too much to bear. Not that staying in the acre was any guarantee of safety. Far from it. Horace was the last to find out. He'd been sitting in bed in a half-sleep trance, moaning and whispering to himself, and when we woke him out of it, he leapt up and started chattering about how he might have discovered a way to block Call's transmissions.
They're on the same psychic wavelength that my prestidigitations travel on, which means they're akin to a mass hallucination, something we can see with our minds rather than our eyes.
He stopped, suddenly, blinking at all of us.
Hello? What are you all doing in my bedroom?
Emma started to tell him, but he quickly cut her off.
Never mind. You don't have to tell me. I dreamed it,
he said, snapping his fingers and letting his eyes fall shut.
France, Miss... Cranespill? No, Hawksbill. Death everywhere, heavy in the air.
He opened his eyes.
Right. I'm coming with you.
Emma said.
That's very kind of you, Horace, but...
Why don't you just knit us some bulletproof sweaters? Enoch said.
That isn't nice,
said Bronwyn, who'd been trying to fit all the books Millard said he needed into one large steamer trunk.
Horace has been through lots of battles with us. Ain't that right? I detest war and fighting, he said. But I'm coming, nevertheless. You're going to need me. I'm not sure why yet, but it's not for my knitting skills.
And he started to look around for a backpack to fill. We had underestimated him yet again. Noor had been avoiding my eyes ever since we'd left the council chamber, I think because she didn't want me to tell her for the 100th time that she didn't need to do this, but I was past that now. She was the only indispensable part of all this. The Imbran shield could fail, and the Acre could fall, but as long as she found the other 6, there was a chance everything could be put right again. But she didn't need me reminding her of that. Her way of bearing the pressure seemed to be to not think too much about it. Just go. Just do. So I let her go, helped her do, and let her avoid my eyes for a while. Perplexus and Millard had lugged the maps back to Ditch House and spread them across the kitchen table again, where they were going over them one last time. Perplexus looked half avian, with map pages poking out of his jacket and the waistband of his pants, and the table was littered with drained espresso cups. We let them work in peace. After an anxious hour, Miss Peregrine returned, pushing Miss Avocet in her wheelchair. They called Noor, Horace, and me into the sitting room to talk. A fire was kindled in the hearth, and Miss Avocet was parked beside it, her head propped on pillows, her eyes tired but alert. V's body was still on the gurney by the darkened window, encased now in an ice-filled coffin. It felt wrong, keeping her like this, but there'd been too much chaos, and no time to give her a funeral, and I suspected the Imbrans wanted to keep her close at hand in the unlikely event that we needed to ask her more questions. Miss Peregrine invited us to sit on the floor cushions. She stood backlit before the crackling hearth while she spoke.
A few final notes. We'll be restarting the Panlupticon very briefly, just long enough for you to cross over. We cannot send advance word of your arrival to Miss Hawksbill, lest we risk the message being intercepted. So you'll have to locate her when you enter her loop.
I hope she's home, I said.
She is,
Horace replied. We didn't need to ask him how he knew.
Isn't it dangerous to restart the Panlupticon?
Emma asked. Miss Peregrine nodded.
Yes, but it's only for 30 seconds or so. A calculated risk we have to take. Does anyone know yet what I'm supposed to do when I find the other 6?
Asked Noor. Miss Avocet struggled to sit up straight.
I had hoped Francesca and our translators would uncover something new in the Apocryphon that might be useful in that regard, but alas, we aren't certain how the 7 go about sealing shut the door, but the one who summoned you there, whoever made those 6 phone calls, will likely know. Goodness, I should hope so, said Horace. We'll take you all to the Panopticon shortly, said Miss Peregrine. No one else in the Acre must know what you're up to. We cannot risk word of your mission making its way back to Call or the Whites. We've no way of knowing whether the Whites we're still holding in our jail have psychic connection with Cole. If he were to find out, he'd surely come after you. So to that end, we'll be sneaking you into the Panopticon, one by one, in shipping crates. Excuse me? Said Horace. Miss Peregrine ignored him. Once you cross through into 1918, you'll have no way of contacting me or this loop, nor should you try. Again, the risk of alerting our enemies is too great. You'll be cut off and entirely on your own.
She'd been facing the fire for much of her short speech, but now she turned to look at us. She was nearly in tears.
If I should never see you again.
Horace jumped up and put his arms around her.
You will, miss, you will. Are you just saying that, Mr. Somnerson? I'm not. I know it, he said,
and whether or not it was true, it was what we all needed to hear. I was about to follow the Embrins and Horace out into the kitchen when Nor tugged at my hand.
Wait.
She looked back toward the window and the ice-filled coffin that lay in shadow beneath it. I was hit by a sudden wave of shame.
We'll bury her as soon as we can. It's not that, she said. I'd like to talk to her again before we go.
She won't be able to hear you. She hugged herself.
I know, but I still want to.
I took a breath, aware suddenly of the faint scent of formaldehyde in the air. Aware, too, that despite the loss of my grandfather, I could never fully understand what Nor was feeling. To lose a loved one you'd only just been reunited with. She took my hand.
Will you stay?
Okay, if you want. We crossed the room to where V lay. Nor knelt beside the ice-filled coffin. I stayed close enough to lend support without invading Nor's space.
Mama, I'm going away now. I'm going to find Penny. I don't know when I'll be back again.
She dug into the ice with her fingers and fished out V's hand, blue from death and cold, kneading it as she talked. I think she said, "I love you and I'm sorry," but I was trying not to listen because it felt too private and because it was hurting my heart. And then the ice shifted and Nor gasped. V's fingers had curled around Nor's hand. Somewhere in her chest, a bit of blood from the poet's heart was still coursing. V's lips parted. A noise like sandpaper on wood escaped them. Nor leaned closer.
Mama?
V's mouth moved and her throat rattled. I hoped she might say, "I love you too," or better still, "It wasn't your fault." Instead, she said,
Horatio.
Nor tensed, then leaned in closer.
What did you say?
The ice shifted in the box. V was trying to sit up, but she could not, and sank back again. Her eyes stayed shut. Her words were drawn out and distorted, rough breaths barely recognizable. She said,
Horatio. He was
V's mouth went slack. Her hand opened and let go of Nor's, and she was gone again. We rushed out into the kitchen to tell the others what had happened, but they'd all gone upstairs except for Horace and Enoch, who were talking together by the sink. Enoch wore a stained apron, meat cleaver in hand, and was in the midst of chopping up a counter full of chickens, presumably for their hearts. "Yeah, that happens sometimes," was his shrugging reaction to our news. "When there's a dollop of residual resurrecto juice left in some ventricle or other, they'll wake up for short blips. Though, if she did anything more than grunt at you, that's very impressive. She must have really wanted to talk to you. It takes a massive effort on the part of the deceased to rise oneself." Nor pursed her lips.
"She said something about Horatio." "Shakespeare again?" said Horace. "No," I said. "I think she must have meant H's Hologast, that Horatio. She said he used to be close to Call and that we should find him." "Find him in what?" Horace asked. "She didn't get a chance to tell us," Nor said. "I could try to ask her if you could wake her up again."
"Can't help you there. I can't rise her more than once every few days, and each time I do it, the quality of the resurrection goes down."
"Oh."
Nor rubbed a hand across her tired eyes. "Sorry, Nor." Enoch thwacked the cleaver into a chopping block and wiped his hands on his apron. "I wouldn't make too much of it anyway. Most post-resurrection chatter is 99% nonsense. Like dreams. No offense, Horace." Horace turned his back on Enoch.
"Offense taken."
"I think it means something," I said. "I've been wondering about Horatio. He gave us that map scrap and clue, then flung himself out H's window. Where'd he go?"
"I don't really care,"
Nor said, and her bitter tone surprised me.
"You know, if it weren't for that stupid map, we would have never found V, and she'd still be alive." "That's not necessarily true. Murnau knew where she was, and probably would have led us there himself eventually. And H and Horatio meant well. They were trying to protect you. They clearly didn't know that V's heart was on Murnau's shopping list." "I guess so," Nor said reluctantly. "So, you think he's still alive? That H's old Hologast is still out there somewhere?"
"Could be," I said. "But he's a white now, and I kind of figured that after a lifetime of servitude as a tamed hollow, he'd go on vacation or something. But you never know." "You know who I'd like to talk to?" Enoch said. He slammed the cleaver down and a chicken head went skidding into the sink. "Myron Bentham." At the mention of his name, a strange chill shot through me.
"As long as we're dreaming, I'd like to talk to Jesus Christ and Mahatma Gandhi," said Horace.
"I met him once," Enoch said.
"Who? Jesus?"
"Gandhi, you twit. He visited the East End once in the 30s. Nice chap. But I'm quite serious about Bentham. If you could find his body, maybe I could wake him up for a chat. He must have had some useful dirt on Call."
"He was collapsed in the Library of Souls along with Call, remember?" Horace said. "There's no body to retrieve. Or not one we'd recognize anyway. The last time I saw him, he turned into a giant mosquito creature."
Enoch brought down his cleaver again. Blood squirted onto the ceiling. Sounds like he'd fit right in. I was on my way upstairs when I heard shouting coming through a window. I stuck my head out to see Millard and Bronwyn arguing with Klaus in the alley. I shimmied through the window as fast as I could, then down the scaffolding to the ground like Millard had showed me.
"What's going on?"
I said, running up to them. Klaus was red-faced from shouting and had a large burlap sack slung over one shoulder. I couldn't see Millard's face, but he was breathing hard, and Bronwyn looked like she had no idea what was happening, but was ready to defend Millard regardless if necessary.
"What's going on?" Millard hissed in a half-yelled undertone. "Is that I got this blackguard the bone and the vial and everything he asked for." "You did?" I said. "When?" "Through some back channels I've cultivated, and let's keep it at that. And now he's refusing to give us the you-know-what." I started to say, "You mean the—" "Shh!" Millard cut me off. "Don't say it out loud." "I can't give it to you because the damn thing exploded," Klaus said, making no effort to lower his voice. "Nearly took my pinky off." He held up a bandaged right hand as evidence. "I told you it might not work, and it didn't." "Then prove it and give us back the blown-apart pieces," Millard said. "I can't. They burned to little piles of blue ash." Millard made a sound of disgust. "Codswallop, I don't believe you. You got it working and are keeping it for yourself." "I should whip you for saying that." Klaus's eyes cut to Bronwyn, who raised her fist. "But instead, I brought you a peace offering. It ain't as good as the you-know-what, but it could save your skin in the right circumstance. I won't accept some booby prize." "Just look at it, for God's sake." He lowered the sack to the ground and untied the rope that held it closed. The sack fell away to reveal a boxy wooden clock about 2 feet high. "Is that—" "That's right, the bone clock." I looked closer. The face looked like stretched and tanned skin, and the hands were made of long, delicate-looking bones. "Why would you give this away? I thought it was made from pieces of your ancestor." "Well, that's just how bad I feel about the whole deal," he said. "You'll bring it back to me, of course. This is just for loansies while you're away on your trip." "And how'd you hear about that?" said Bronwyn. Klaus grinned. "Secrets have short half-lives in the Acre." "What's it do?" I asked, bringing our discussion back to the clock. "It helps you hear the whispers." "What whispers?" said Bronwyn. "Don't fall for his tricks," said Millard, but Bronwyn shushed him. "Of someone who's just passing on," Klaus said. "After the heart and brain have given up the ghost, but the ghost itself is still clinging to the body, they whisper, see, but faster than the mind can grasp and quieter than the ear can hear. So you can't understand it unless you slow down the world and listen real close." "And what good will that do us?" Millard said impatiently. "The bone clock is what does the slowing, and that slowing is what allows you to hear the whispers. Everything comes to a snail's crawl. It can serve a lot of uses, even beyond listening to ghosts. You unlock the case with the ring finger key, wind the clock with the thumb key, then crank the mainspring with the index finger." He dug a key ring from his pocket and held it out. The ring was iron, and the jingling keys were bone. Millard snatched it. "This doesn't make up for the you-know-what," he said reluctantly. "If I catch wind of you using it, you'll be caught and thrown in jail before you can say I'm a traitor to my people." Millard knelt beside the bone clock, ran his hand over its carved top and side. "And, thank you," he said quietly. Klaus nodded. "Hope you never need to use it." He took a flask from his pocket. "Good luck to you all," he said, and drank. We were halfway up the scaffolding when a shout came from below. "The hell do you think you're doing? Get away from there!"
We looked down to see Rex Donovan and Dogface goggling at us from the alley. When Rex saw me, he squinted and says, "Is that you, Portman?"
What are you doing here?
said Dogface. "Keep your voices down," Millard hissed. "We live here?" I said.
Then why are you breaking in?
Dogface said with a sneer.
"We're sneaking in," said Bronwyn, "and never mind why."
"What are you doing here?" I asked them. "I thought you'd all have left with Parkins and Lamoth." Dogface spit on the ground.
To hell with those gutless traitors.
"We decided to stay and cast our lot with the only peculiars that got any honor at all, and that's you," said Rek. "You're welcome, and God help us." They continued on their way, and we resumed our clambering. "I guess we misjudged them," I said.
"We shall see about that,"
Millard replied. We went back in through the window we'd snuck out of. No one inside had heard the shouts, and we decided not to tell them. Bronwyn wedged the bone clock into the same trunk that contained Millard's books and maps, which she had outfitted with ropes that would allow her to carry it like a big, bulky backpack. She'd only just fastened it shut when we heard a commotion downstairs and rushed down to the kitchen to find all 12 Imbrins talking with our friends amid the hay and chicken feathers. It was nearly time to leave, and they'd come to see us off. Some gave us their feathers as talismans, which we tucked into our pockets or poked through the metal grommets of our period-accurate backpacks. Horace distributed the bulletproof sweaters he'd made from peculiar sheep's wool. These had become indispensable. At this point, I would have felt naked going on a dangerous outing without one, itchy as they were. And then the moment came, and we followed Miss Peregrine out of the house and around to the alley again. Klaus was gone. Instead, there were 6 large crates waiting for us. Mine was big enough to fit 2 people, and since Nor had already been closed into a smaller crate by herself, Emma squeezed in beside me. We sat shoulder to shoulder, knees hugged to our chest, our backs against the crate walls. Horace was describing to the Imbrins his new theory about how to stop Call's transmissions, something about playing a specific frequency through the loudspeakers, a note that tended to disrupt hypnosis. But then the crate lid closed over our heads, and his voice muffled. Emma and I jostled against each other as our crate was loaded onto a wagon. "Did you ever think that it would get this bad?" I said, my teeth clacking as the wagon began to roll along the acres' pitted streets.
"You mean with Call getting resurrected and coming after us? And all the power of the Library of Souls at his disposal?"
"Yeah, that." I felt her shoulders rise, then fall.
"Truthfully, I never thought it would get this good."
I thought I'd misheard her.
"It doesn't feel much different than having the Hollows hunting at us at every turn," she went on, "which was our reality for years and years. Before you came along, we had no way to defend against them. We were trapped and helpless. So, in a way, that piece of things doesn't feel like it's changed much. At least now we're all together, instead of split apart in dozens of different loops. At least now we can fight as one. And we're not helpless anymore. We have you, and we have Nor. We have a chance."
I felt a surge of pride expanding in me, immediately followed by a deflating prick of fear. "But it might not work," I said. "We could fail."
"As with any great endeavor," she said, "better to die trying. Better to burn out than fade away."
"Hey, hey, my, I said.
"You're what?"
"Neil Young?" I said. Better to burn out. I played his record for you once in my room. I remember. We danced. She leaned into me, and I felt her hair fall onto my shoulder. I leaned into her just a little, just briefly. Just friends. Though I loved her still in a dimmed and dusty way. Out on the streets, people were laughing. Distantly, someone sawed away at a violin. People were trying to forget the sword hanging over them, the wolf at their gates, if only for an evening. Emma said quietly, "Do you regret it?" "What?" My breath stalled. "Your decision. Choosing this, our world, over your family. If you could be a regular kid again, fretting about grades and schoolgirls, I wouldn't. I don't regret any of it. Not for a second." Then I really thought about it. Tried to imagine what I'd be doing now if none of this had happened. If I'd never gone to the island, never met Emma or the other children. But I couldn't. I'd come too far and changed too much. I had evolved into a different kind of person. But there was one thing I regretted. Maybe it would have been better for everyone if we'd never met, I said. "What's that supposed to mean?" she said, hurt. "Why?" "Then none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have been at the Battle of Devil's Acre, which means Call would never have dragged me into the Library of Souls, and I wouldn't have been able to give him one of the soul jars." "Stop being ridiculous. It's true, he wanted the library's power, and he never would have gotten it if it wasn't for me." "You can't think that way. You'll drive yourself mad." "Way too late for that," I said. "And anyway, Call never would have needed all those terrible powers to get what he wanted if not for you. He had just developed hollows who could break into loops, remember? He would have invaded them one by one until all of us were dead or captured. I'm sure he would have preferred not to have died and come back as half a hellbeast, all things being equal. But you forced him to, with all your daring do and badassery, to borrow a slang term from you modern people." We hit a pothole so deep I felt my brain slap the inside of my skull, and the incisive argument I was going to make turned into, "Yeah, I guess so." "And if not for you, we'd all still be loop-trapped and in constant danger of aging forward. I can't tell you what a relief it is not to worry about going gray overnight or turning into a bag of dust while doing some out-of-loop grocery shopping." "I didn't do that. It was the Imbrins and Bentham, but it was because of you. If not for that, we wouldn't have known it was even possible to do. So thanks to you, someday soon, everyone in the acre will be free of loops too. Hopefully." The wagon jolted to a stop. "You ready?" I said, grateful for a change of subject. "I'm serious, Jacob. Please take this to heart. You only ever helped us. You were the best thing to happen to us in a long time." I was feeling 100 different things, but didn't know how to say any of them. 3 weeks ago, I would have kissed her. Instead, I found her hand in the dark and squeezed it. "Thank you," I said. "Regret retracted, compliment accepted." "Good," she whispered and squeezed back. And then the lid creaked open. I pulled my hand free just as Miss Peregrine's face appeared, peering down at us. "Why, Jacob, you're bright red." I jumped up and got out of the crate as fast as I could. We were snuck into Bentham's house through a back alley carriage entrance. The arrivals were staggered so as not to spark too much curiosity along the way. Bronwyn used a crowbar to pry open each crate as it came into the little stone-walled basement room. It reminded me of the way vampires transported themselves from place to place in stories, packed away from the sun inside their cushy, crated coffins. Only Miss Peregrine, Miss Wren, and Miss Cuckoo had come to see us off. There were 8 of us altogether, including Addison. He had flatly refused to be sealed into a crate and was strutting around like a general. Once we'd all emerged and stretched our cramped limbs, we were given tan coats made from heavy wool, which, combined with Horace's sweaters, I worried would quickly become suffocating. It was the middle of November in Miss Hawksbill's loop, Millard said, and we would need the extra warmth. We were handed our backpacks. I shrugged into the straps of mine and felt the weight, which was considerable. The Embrins had repeatedly assured us we'd find Miss Turn's loop with no problem, but the things they'd stuffed our packs with told a different story. Thermal blankets, canned food, ice picks, binoculars, first aid.
Just in case you run into a delay, Miss Wren said. Or have trouble finding Miss Hawksbill, Miss Cuckoo added.
Nora rifled through her pack.
No weapons, she noted. Guns would only arouse suspicion if you should run into trouble with any soldiers, Miss Cuckoo said. If they think you're combatants, you could end up in a military prison camp, or worse.
With that cheerful thought to comfort us, we proceeded up to the staircase to the lower Panlupticon hall. I'd rarely seen it so empty. Usually there were a dozen people coming and going, transit officials stamping passports and checking documents, Sharon stalking around to make sure everything was shipshape. It reminded me of the first time I'd seen it, when Emma and I had stumbled into this hallway by accident, before we ever met Bentham. Now it was even quieter. There were no drifts of snow spilling across the carpet, no piles of sand collecting around the jambs of desert loop doors, no echo of whistling wind or crashing surf. The doors were dead, blank, deactivated, at least for now. The Embrins escorted us nearly all the way down the hall, around a corner into an even narrower hall, to a door built into a dead-end wall. Its paint was flaking and the plaque read, France, November 1918. Sometimes you could tell how often and how recently a particular loop door had been used by checking the frame around it, because Sharon had gotten into the habit of putting subtle notches in the wood. There were no notches in this door. It hadn't been used in a long time. Certainly not since the Embrins had occupied the acre.
Coats on, everyone, Miss Peregrine said.
We shrugged on our long wool coats and antique boots that went halfway up our calves. There was even a coat for Addison, a little green number with short sleeves and a faux fur trim, which Miss Wren helped him into. Millard, who would freeze if naked, but attract way too much attention if he was anything other than mummified in clothes, pulled on a muffler, ear-flap cap, and gloves, and hung a pair of smoked goggles around his neck that he could pull over his eyes at a moment's notice.
It had better be arctically frigid over there. I'm sweltering, said Millard.
You look dashing, Horace said to him.
Like one of the polar expeditioneers. Which, the one who got lost and had to eat his crew? Millard loosened the muffler and fanned himself.
You're sure Miss Hawksbill will be waiting for us?
I saw it in a dream. She's in her house right now, not far from the loop entrance. We shouldn't have much trouble finding her.
Miss Wren announced that we'd have only 30 seconds from the time the Panlupticon restarted to get inside the loop before the door would shut behind us. Sharon was down in the machine-clogged guts of the building, standing ready for the signal.
Are you ready?
asked Miss Peregrine. I'm ready, said Nor, and down the line we all answered the same. Ready, ready, ready.
All right, then.
We waited. I glanced out a window, and beyond the yellow sky, I could see the quilt glowing green. I thought of old Miss Avocet and how exhausted all the Imbrans were. Until we succeeded, none of them could sleep, or that green shield keeping our enemies at bay would shatter. The floor began to rumble. The candle-shaped electric sconces along the wall flickered. I wondered for a moment if it was an earthquake, but then a puff of something like steam escaped from the crack under the door in front of us and from every door down the hall, and there was a faint that sounded like an egg timer hitting 0. The Panlupticon was back online. Miss Peregrine and Miss Wren exchanged an anxious glance, and then Miss Peregrine reached out her arm and turned the knob of France, November 1918. It blew inward, the knob sucked from her hand and slammed hard against the inner wall. She fell back, startled. I ventured a look inside. It was the usual Panlupticon sameness, an uninviting bed that never tempted you to linger, a wardrobe and a nightstand, and the red poppy carpeting that ended at a missing fourth wall. Beyond that, a shimmering image of a snowy forest was materializing. Emma started toward the door, but Miss Peregrine held out her arm to stop her.
Wait for it, she said. It's not quite born yet.
We watched the forest. It brightened and the shimmers stopped, and then it looked every bit as real as the view out the window.
Godspeed, children,
Miss Peregrine said.
May the elders watch over you.
End of chapter 13.